Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube for Pigs Round 5 Captaincy Recommendations. Last week was absolutely brutal. I did flag that it was going to be a tough week for captaincy, but even I didn't expect it to be that horrible. Look, if you got a 120 captain last week, you were in the minority. Well done. Even 100 captain was probably fine last week. That was absolutely dismal. For me, I did the Zorko VC for 96. I thought it was going to be a lot better than that. I was a bit disappointed. I decided not to take it. I rolled into a Finn Callahan captaincy, which was just horrible. Brutal. Probably one of my worst captaincies I've had in years. But let's move on. Round 5. It's looking like we're going to have some better captaincy options than last week. Although, I'll probably warn you again, it's not going to be massive. Like, I'm looking at some of the matchups. There are some good matchups. But just in general, there's not going to be, heaps of players go 130 plus. But there will be some, so let's get into it. My number 3 vice-captain option is Patrick Cripps. Patrick has been a frustrating own to start the season for those that have owned him, and for good reason. He reeled off a 120 against Richmond in round 1, but since then, he's averaged 83 points in his following 3 games. That's horrible. The good news here is that he should reward you this week. A matchup with West Coast, who are the easiest midfield in the league to score against. A team that he has recent scores of 142 and 153 against. And I remember those 2 games because I recommended him as a captain in those games. A lot of my reasoning is that those games against the Eagles were at Optus Stadium, and Patrick Cripps is from WA and he always dominates when he returns home to WA against West Coast at Optus. It's just one of his bunny teams. Now, this game is not in WA. It's in Adelaide due to gather round. But that's okay because Adelaide Oval is still his second best scoring ground. Optus is his number 1. But Adelaide's his second best for games where he's played at least 5 games at. So this game is early enough in the round where you can VC a guy that if you picked him as a primo mid. And here he is against the worst midfield in the league. In addition, Carlton are under the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, and I kind of expect Carlton to bounce back in a big way and have a massive win this week. And just given the extra attention that gather round's going to bring, I probably expect their captain to lead from the front. And Patrick Cripps is someone that when Carlton are really down, he will put Carlton on his back and just wheel them over the line. And that often leads to big Supercoach scores, and I think he's got a good one coming this week. So, owners, hold on. I think you're in for a good one here. Then number 2 is his ruckman, Tom De Koning. This week, we have the highest averaging Supercoach ruckman coming up against the easiest team for ruckman to score against. So this could be huge. TDK already has two scores of 133 plus in the first month of footy this year. And this is a team he scored 118 on back in 2023 before he even had his breakout season. So we know West Coast have recently given up scores of 107 to Briggs, 165 to Luke Jackson, and 144 to Jared Witts. In fact, so far this season, the 4 rucks who have played West Coast have gotten a 16% boost to their current form. So, whatever they're kind of normally doing in their current form, when they play West Coast, they get a 16% boost on average. If Tom De Koning gets a 16% boost to his current form, you're looking at a 135 score with ease. That's kind of the minimum. My only concern here is team sheets. The last 3 weeks, Tom De Koning, he's really faded out in the second half. He's left some big scores on the table. And full-time rucking, it's a tough gig. He's having to shoulder a big load at the moment. And it hasn't been a coincidence that Carlton's second halves have also been horrible. So how do they fix that? I expect them to bring in some support for Tom as soon as it's available. Now, will that support come through Harry Mackay chopping out in the ruck like he did last year? Mackay played VFL last week, so he must be pretty close. Or will it be Mark Pitnet, who last week was only listed as 1 week away, so he could be ready. I mean, they might bring him back through the VFL, I don't know, but I'm recording this on the Monday, so I don't know what Carlton are going to do. If it's Mackay in, that helps Tom De Koning, and this could be a huge score. If it's Pitnet in, I'm so off this pick. Tom De Koning averaged 71 AFL fantasy points with Pitto in the team last year. Now, I haven't crunched the Supercoach numbers, haven't had time for that, but it would be similarly poor. Team sheets are going to determine this one. And just to clarify, if Pitto is not playing, this is a huge TDK VC game. If Pitto is playing, Tom De Koning could be a trade out. That's how important team sheets are going to be in this game and moving forward to Tom De Koning. So if Pitto's named, I'd steer clear of this VC and I'll find you someone else to recommend. Don't worry about that. But really just keep an eye on if Mackay's in, if Pitnet's in, if neither are in, who knows? And for that reason, that uncertainty is why he's not my number one VC option. And that goes to Harry Sheezel. Harry had a down game in his first 3 games of 2025, but the last quarter of round 3, he moved to the back line, back into that old pigging role he does. In that quarter, he had 12 disposals, and he backed it up last week, starting the game with 21 disposals to half-time. If Sheezel maintains that half-back role, it is a scary prospect for non-owners. Now, it hasn't translated to winning football for North Melbourne, so I'm not really sure how long they're going to persist with it for. However, given this matchup, I don't really care where he plays, just because Gold Coast, they're the 5th easiest matchup for inside midfielders and a positive matchup for wingers. So even if he plays midfield or wing or something, I think he'll still score well. But what you want for this VC for owners, Gold Coast are the easiest matchup in the league for designated kickers right now. So that guy coming out of half-back, and he hasn't really been taking kickouts in that role, but they're looking for him at all costs. So, like I said, I think wherever he plays, he'll score well. But if he's in that half-back quarterback role, this could be a really big one. That same role saw Mitch Hinge go 116 last week and Jake Bowie go 116 the week before against the Suns. So if those two can score 116 each, imagine what the Shees will do if he plays that role. This is an easy VC shout in this game, just due to the huge ceiling he could have if things go his way. Now, I would love to be able to VC Sheezel into Tom De Koning, but just have a look at the fixture because it'll probably only be quarter time or something in that game, so you can't really do that. So just with gather round and so many games squished in, do make sure you go and have a look at the fixture and when actually game times start, because you might not be able to do the looping or the VC to see you want, so just keep that in mind. Point of difference captain. Another 125 plus from my pod captain recommendation last week. We've started the years with scores of 136, 162, and then a 128 last week with Tom Green for my pod captain, so they're going really well. And let's keep it rolling with Zach Merritt against Melbourne. He's in only 8% of teams, and only 4.5% of the top 1% of coaches have him. So this is a real point of difference. Now, Zach, his CBAs have been down this year. He's only averaging 60% centre bounce attendances. That's down from 80% that he was at last year. Despite that, he's averaging 113 SuperCoach still, and he's already ripped off a trademark 145 against Adelaide in round 2. And now, with Jai Caldwell injured, there's still some uncertainty around Darcy Parish and Will Setterfield, whether they're actually coming back, whether they need more time in the VFL, whether Setterfield even plays AFL at all. Not really sure what the go is. So with the Caldwell injury and their uncertainty, I wouldn't be surprised if Merritt's required to play a bit more time in the midfield this round. And this week he gets a matchup with Melbourne, who are currently giving up huge points to midfielders. In fact, they're the 3rd easiest matchup for inside midfielders. But even if Zach isn't playing inside wing, they're also the easiest matchup in the league for wingers and a positive matchup for designated kickers. So wherever Zach plays, I expect him to be able to have his way with the Melbourne rabble. We just saw Matt Rowell score a 136, Tom Powell score a 124, Tom Green score a 115 on them. Plus, last week, Bailey Smith let a big SuperCoach score go because he had only 68% disposal efficiency and 5 clangers. But Bailey Smith in that game against Melbourne, he managed 28 disposals, 7 marks, 8 tackles. So like Smith, Merritt is a player that can tackle well, he can spread to get open marks, he can work hard to both ends of the ground and rack up disposals. But unlike Baz, Merritt's a brilliant kick of the footy. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had similar stats but with a high disposal efficiency, and if he does that, this could be a signature Merritt game. Remember, he scored 134 on Melbourne in gather round in 2023. So the first year of 2023, it was the same matchup, and he ripped them for a 134. So, look, Zach could be doing that again. Now to the captains. Captain option number 5 is Lachie Neale. Now, Lachie Neale scored a 130 last week against Richmond, and honestly, it looked like it should have been much bigger. He's been a rollercoaster ride for owners this year with scores of 41, 133, 71, 130. I think owners now, finally, get a second big one in a row this week. Against the Bulldogs, who appear to be a restrictive matchup for inside mids over the last 10 games. As a general rule, they have been restricting midfielders, but they've recently just given up 142 to Caleb Sarong, 135 to Andrew Brayshaw, 126 to George Hewitt, and 125 to Nick Dacos. So, yes, Dogs are restricted, but over the last 3 weeks, there have been some teams to burn them. So there certainly is scoring to be had against the Dogs, and I don't expect them to tag Neale. Bulldogs don't really seem to be doing any tagging. And this one's fairly simple. When Lachie Neale isn't tagged, he scores well. I don't expect this to be a huge 176 like he had in his 2023 gather-round endeavour, but a safe 120 to 135, yeah, I'm fairly confident that happens. My number 4 captain option is his teammate, Dane Zorko. Dane let us down last week and was probably what was meant to be one of his easiest matchups of the year. Does that mean we should give up on him? Probably not. He was the highest SuperCoach scorer of the round prior to that blip, and that blip was still a 96. It wasn't that terrible. This week, the Lions travel to Norwood Oval to play the Bulldogs. This is a Bulldogs team that are the 3rd easiest opponent for designated kickers. I mean, they just let Luke Ryan return to vintage form with a 134. They let Jeremy Howe have 112 the week before, and we know Jeremy Howe's not a big scorer. What do those two guys have in common? They're the number 1 kicking guys for their teams on those weeks. And you know who else is the number 1 kick-in taker for their team? That is Dane Zorko. He took 8 kick-ins last week, and he's taken more than double the next Lions teammates for kick-ins over the entire season. So he is their kick-in pig. I remember there being some discussions about Norwood Oval's small size in 2023 when it was first used as an AFL game for gather round. So I went back and I looked at what did other designated kicker stats do there last year. So last year, Zorko played there. He had 28 disposals and 8 marks last year. In that same game, Sheasel had 35 and 6. The next day, on the Sunday, Sinclair had 29 and 5, and Wang had 27 and 11 marks. So it actually does look like a ground that can be conducive to large disposals and mark numbers for these accumulating halfback types. So I think this is a really great bounce-back matchup for Dane. I think he's going to be a really safe captaincy option, despite his sub-ton last week. Number 3, now we're starting to get big and juicy. Andrew Brayshaw. Andrew's taken advantage of 2 easy matchups in a row now, scoring 131 and 135 in his last 2. Now he gets a 3rd easy matchup. And if you started him, it was for this run. Melbourne essentially have one of the best... Freo essentially have one of the best runs in the first 6 games for midfielders. So this is why you started him. It does get a lot harder from round 7 onwards, but we're not there yet. Let's take advantage of this. This week he has a date with the Tigers. The Tigers are currently the 2nd easiest midfield matchup for inside midfielders, and that's kind of been skewed and blown out of the water after they gave up a 156 to Hugh McCluggage, 130 to Will Ashcroft, and 130 to Lachie Neale last week. Andrew scored 128 on Richmond in their round 17 meeting of last year, and he looks to be in good enough form to at least replicate that again this week. The thing that's really standing out for me this year for Brayshaw is his tackle numbers. He's still getting his high disposal numbers, still getting forward to hit the scoreboard, but the thing for him, he's averaging 7.5 tackles per game to start the year. That's like Tristan Cherry of last year numbers or peak Jack Steele numbers. That's huge, 7.5 tackles a game. Now that isn't sustainable, that's not going to keep up for the whole year, but it does show he's having a real crack and he's being rewarded with 2 good wins in a row. I don't see a reason for that to slow down this weekend against a really, really poor midfield of Richmond. My number 2 captain option is Lachie Whitfield. Lachie was elite last weekend, 148 SuperCoach points against the Eagles. That takes his season average up to 124. And now a matchup with St Kilda, who have historically been an incredibly easy matchup for defenders. And the Saints are the 2nd easiest matchup for wingers and attacking defenders. But actually, surprisingly, over the last 10 games, they haven't been as easy a matchup for designated kickers. It's been a bit of a mixed bag for defenders against the Saints recently. We've seen Miles Bergman and Josh Worrell really get a hold of them, but guys like Farrell, Short, Holmes and Hinge, they all struggled to take advantage. So let's be honest, Lockie Midfield is a much better player than all of those guys. He's just coming off a 35 disposal, 10 mark game on the weekend. Now the only risk here is the Marcus Windhager tag, which has been deployed against halfbacks in previous years, but it hasn't really this year. My gut feeling is that tag will go to either Tom Green or Finn Callaghan in this one. For me, I think it's probably pretty likely it goes to Tom Green. And this is why. According to DFS, in 2025, Marcus Windhager has tagged Jordan Dawson, Max Holmes, Tim Taranto and Connor Rozee, all inside midfielders. This is backed up by the fact that Windhager has averaged 65% CBAs this season. So he's the third banana in that Saints midfield brigade. And as such, I expect Whitfield to get a free run at it this weekend while probably Tom Green gets tagged. And a matchup with the Saints for a defender is always great news when they're not tagged. But it's not my number one option. I think it's going to be big, but my number one option is Caleb Serong. After 3 games of averaging around 100, Caleb put it all together last week with a 142. And don't get me wrong, his first 3 games weren't that bad. He just got tagged in 2 of them, then he had a lot of clangers in the third. He's averaging 36 disposals and 13 clearances over his last 2 games. That shows the type of form he's really in. He is hot. Poor old Richmond in this one. Whenever I recommend Andrew and Caleb, I'm always wrestling which order to put them in, and then without fail, I just recommend Serong higher, and that's because of his contested possessions and his clearance game. And here I go, doing it again. Look, I don't really have much more to add to this recommendation. This could be a huge score, and if you own him, I think you should just captain Caleb Serong. It's that simple. He is in hot form despite the clangers in round 3, and he plays Richmond. Just lock it in. So those are my favourite 9 captain options for the week. But as I said, make sure you do have a look at the fixture and when games start, because there are some overlapping games, which is really annoying, and some overlapping games with some big captaincies, which is extra annoying. But as always, as requested, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the mark, so they're my top 9. Here's another few that I think will have really good weeks. I think you could roll with them as your captain, especially for your draft leagues. These are some good options. I think in the first game, I think Riley O'Brien, Rory Laird and Mitch Hinge will probably have big games. Darcy Cameron and Isaac Heaney, Nick Blakey, Matt Roberts, all in that Friday night game. I think they could all score well. Then I think LDU, Adam Chera, Bailey Dale, Oscar McInerney, Josh Dunkley, the Bombers boys in Nick Martin and Jordan Ridley, then Toby Nankervis and Jordan Clark rounding it out. I think there are some guys that could have some good games. So that's my round 5 Supercoach captaincy recommendations. I'm, at this stage, going to be VCing Tom De Koning because I'm really hoping Pitnet's not playing. So I'm going to VC TDK. I'll then captain Dane Zorko. I'm pretty happy with it. Dane Zorko back up as a bounce back against the Bulldogs. I've got no issue with that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Turn your notifications on so you don't miss this video weekly. That's where you can find me on Twitter on the screen at pig_DRSC, or if you want to join our Patreon, jump into our community, patreon.com/DrSuperCoach. Until then, good luck. Hope you dominate round 5. And if you're going to gather round, I hope you have a brilliant time.